Prison threats and the real causes of inmate death. The threat that never leaves prison: violence is often misunderstood. Popular culture frames inmate death as sudden, fights, riots, stabbings, chaos erupting without warning. The reality inside American prisons is far more systematic and far more dangerous. Most inmate deaths are not spontaneous. They are the result of persistent threats, unmanaged environments, and institutional neglect that builds pressure over time. In prison, danger does not announce itself loudly. It settles in quietly and stays. The constant state of threat. Every prison operates under threat. Not a single moment of danger, but a continuous condition. Threats exist in housing units, dining halls, recreation yards, medical lines, showers, lockdown corridors. Inmates do not experience safety as a stable condition. Safety is temporary, conditional, and often dependent on social positioning. The threat is not always physical at first. It begins socially. Who you associate with. Where you sit. Who you owe. Who believes you disrespected them. Violence is often the final step, not the first. Hierarchy. As survival prisons develop informal hierarchies faster than almost any other institution. These hierarchies are shaped by race, gang affiliation, sentence length, reputation, willingness to retaliate. New inmates are assessed immediately. Not officially, but socially. Others watch how they walk, how they speak, how they respond to pressure. Weakness is not always punished instantly. Sometimes it's noted and stored. Threat is cumulative. The silent threat of debt. One of the most common precursors to inmate death is debt. Debt in prison does not function like debt outside. There are no payment plans. No negotiation after a deadline passes. Debt can be created by borrowed food, borrowed hygiene items, gambling, drug transactions, protection agreements. And unpaid debt becomes leverage. Leverage becomes pressure. Pressure becomes violence. Many inmates who die violently were not targeted randomly. They were marked weeks or months earlier. The threat existed long before the attack. Gang control and enforced violence. In many prisons, gangs control entire housing units. This control does not always manifest as visible chaos. Often, it appears as order. Gangs enforce rules: who may use shared spaces, who may speak to whom, who must participate in violence. Refusal is rarely tolerated. Inmate deaths linked to gangs are often mislabeled as inmate-on-inmate violence. In reality, many are ordered outcomes, not spontaneous acts. The person who carries out the violence is not always the one who benefits from it. Threat operates vertically as well as horizontally. Protective custody is not protection. Some inmates are placed in protective custody due to sexual offense convictions, cooperation with authorities, mental health vulnerabilities, threats from other inmates. Protective custody reduces exposure, but it does not eliminate threat. Isolation units are understaffed. Movement still occurs. Information still spreads. Officers cannot monitor every interaction. Many inmates die not because protection was unavailable, but because it was incomplete. Threat adapts. Medical neglect as a threat multiplier. One of the least visible threats in prison is medical neglect. Prisons are not hospitals. Medical departments are often underfunded, understaffed, and overwhelmed. Conditions that contribute to inmate deaths include delayed treatment, ignored symptoms, inadequate mental health care, poor chronic illness management. Medical emergencies inside prison escalate quickly because response time is limited and movement is restricted. An untreated infection, seizure disorder, or heart condition becomes fatal faster behind bars. Threat does not always wear a weapon. Mental health and suicide risk. A significant portion of inmate deaths are classified as suicides. These deaths are often discussed as individual choices, but the environment plays a central role. Factors that increase suicide risk in prison: solitary confinement, extended lockdowns, lack of mental health services, exposure to violence, legal despair. Many inmates who die by suicide were previously flagged as at risk. Monitoring often fails due to staffing shortages or policy gaps. The threat here is systemic, not personal. The threat of retaliation violence in prison rarely ends with a single act. Retaliation cycles are common. One assault leads to another. One death creates another target. Inmates who witness violence may become threats themselves, either as potential informants or symbolic targets. This creates an environment where silence becomes survival. Many deaths occur because someone was perceived as a future risk, not an immediate one. Officer presence does not equal safety. Correctional officers are responsible for maintaining order, but they are limited by staffing ratios, physical layout, policy restrictions. Officers cannot be everywhere. They rely on routine, not omnipresence. Many inmate deaths occur during shift changes, in blind spots, during unsupervised movement in overcrowded units. The threat is not absence of authority. It is limitation of control. Overcrowding as a force multiplier. Overcrowding intensifies every threat. More inmates mean increased tension, reduced supervision, slower medical response, higher gang influence. Facilities designed for fewer people become pressure chambers. Deaths increase not because prisons become more violent, but because violence becomes harder to prevent. The illusion of randomness. When an inmate dies, reports often describe the event as sudden or unexpected. Inside the prison, it rarely feels that way. Other inmates usually knew who was under pressure, who was in debt, who was being tested, who was isolated. Threat leaves traces. The system often fails to read them. Prison threats and the real causes of inmate death: violence, disease, and the hidden medical killers. When people think about death in prison, they imagine violence first. Fights, stabbings, riots, sudden chaos captured in headlines. That picture is incomplete. While violence is a factor, it is not the leading cause of inmate death in the United States. The most dangerous threats inside prison are often slow, invisible, and bureaucratic. They do not arrive with shouting or weapons. They arrive through neglect, delay, and systems never designed to keep people alive for long periods under confinement. Prison kills quietly far more often than it kills loudly. Violence, the visible but misunderstood cause. Violence does kill inmates, but not in the way popular culture suggests. Most fatal assaults in prison are targeted, planned, short in duration, occurring in known high-risk locations. They rarely resemble chaotic brawls. Instead, they happen during brief moments of unsupervised movement inside cells and showers during overcrowded recreation periods. These incidents often involve multiple attackers, improvised weapons, prior threats, or deaths. Yet even when violence is the direct cause of death, it is usually the end of a longer chain of failures: intelligence breakdowns, understaffing, overcrowding, or ignored warnings. Violence does not emerge from nowhere. It grows where control thins. Overcrowding turns conflict fatal. Overcrowding is one of the strongest predictors of inmate death. When prisons exceed capacity, tensions rise, supervision decreases, medical response slows, gang influence expands, cells designed for one person house 2 or 3. Dormitories overflow. Noise levels increase. Privacy disappears. Under these conditions, minor conflicts escalate faster and resolve harder. An argument that might have ended in separation becomes physical. A fight that might have been stopped becomes fatal. Overcrowding doesn't create violence. It removes the buffers that stop it from killing. Disease, the leading killer behind bars. The most common cause of inmate death in U.S. prisons is illness, not violence. Inmates die from heart disease, cancer, respiratory illness, liver disease, infectious diseases. Prison populations have higher rates of chronic illness than the general public. Many inmates enter prison already unhealthy due to poverty, limited healthcare access, substance use disorders, untreated mental illness. Prison does not correct these conditions. In many cases, it worsens them. Delayed medical care. Prisons are not equipped to provide fast medical response. Common delays include long waits for sick call, dismissed complaints, understaffed medical unit, security delays before transport. An inmate experiencing chest pain may wait hours before evaluation. A worsening infection may be treated with minimal intervention until it becomes systemic. In the outside world, early treatment saves lives. Inside prison, delay is built into the system. Many inmates who die from medical causes had previously reported symptoms. Chronic illness without management. Managing chronic illness requires consistency, regular monitoring, medication adjustments, follow-up care. Prisons struggle with this. Issues include missed medication doses, inconsistent treatment plans, limited specialist access, poor medical record continuity, transfers between facilities interrupt care. Lockdowns cancel appointments. Staff shortages reduce monitoring. The result is preventable deterioration. An illness that is manageable outside becomes deadly inside. Infectious disease in closed systems. Prisons are ideal environments for disease transmission. Crowded housing, limited ventilation, shared facilities, and poor sanitation create conditions where infections spread rapidly. Common prison-related health risks include tuberculosis, hepatitis, influenza, skin infections. Outbreaks often go undetected until severe. Quarantine measures are difficult to enforce without worsening isolation and tension. When disease spreads inside prison, treatment lags behind transmission. Substance withdrawal and overdose. Substance use plays a major role in inmate mortality. Some inmates enter prison physically dependent on drugs or alcohol. Withdrawal can be dangerous if not medically supervised. Deaths occur due to alcohol withdrawal complications, opioid withdrawal combined with dehydration, post-release overdoses shortly after release. Inside prison, withdrawal is sometimes treated as a disciplinary issue rather than a medical one. The threat is not the substance alone, it is unmanaged withdrawal in a controlled environment. Mental illness and suicide. Suicide is one of the leading causes of death in jails and a significant cause in prisons. Risk factors include solitary confinement, legal hopelessness, mental illness, prior trauma, exposure to violence. Many inmates who die by suicide had previously been identified as at risk. Monitoring protocols exist, but staffing shortages and institutional strain limit effectiveness. Cells designed for security are not designed for mental health. When despair meets isolation, the outcome can be fatal. Use of force and medical crisis. In some cases, inmate deaths follow use of force incidents. These deaths are often attributed to medical emergencies during restraint, undiagnosed health conditions, stress-related cardiac events. The line between force and medical failure is often blurred. Investigations may focus on compliance rather than physiology. These deaths are rarely simple. They involve layers of policy, training, and response gaps. Aging behind bars. Prison populations are aging rapidly. Long sentences mean more inmates reach advanced age inside. Older inmates have higher medical needs, reduced mobility, increased vulnerability. Facilities designed for younger populations struggle to care for the elderly. Falls, untreated illness, and delayed response contribute to mortality. Prison was not built to function as long-term elder care. Why these deaths stay hidden? Medical deaths do not make headlines. They lack spectacle. They occur quietly in infirmaries or cells. Reports describe them in clinical language. But these deaths are not natural in the ordinary sense. They occur in environments where freedom is removed, care is restricted, delay is institutional. The prison environment shapes the outcome. Staff failure, policy gaps, and institutional responsibility. When inmate deaths are investigated, the focus often lands on individuals: the violent prisoner, the sick inmate, the mentally ill person who could not cope. This framing is convenient. It narrows responsibility. It avoids confronting the larger structure that made the death possible. But prisons are not unmanaged spaces. They are controlled institutions, governed by policy, staffed by professionals, and funded by the state. When deaths occur repeatedly under similar conditions, the cause is not individual failure alone. It is institutional design. In many cases, inmate deaths are not the result of a single mistake. They are the predictable outcome of staff limitations, policy gaps, and systemic strain. Understaffing as a structural risk. Understaffing is one of the most consistent factors linked to inmate death. Correctional facilities across the United States routinely operate below recommended staffing levels. Vacancies go unfilled. Overtime becomes normal. Fatigue becomes chronic. When staffing is thin, fewer officers supervise more inmates. Blind spots increase response times. Slow intelligence gathering collapses. Officers cannot intervene in conflicts they do not see. They cannot prevent violence they are not present to interrupt. They cannot monitor mental health crises while also managing security tasks. Understaffing does not mean officers do not care. It means they are overwhelmed. Training gaps and reality on the ground. Correctional officers receive training, but training does not eliminate systemic risk. Many officers are trained for control, compliance, emergency response. They are not trained extensively for mental health crisis management, medical triage, suicide prevention, long-term behavioral assessment. As prison populations have shifted, older inmates, higher mental illness rates, complex medical needs, training has not always kept pace. Officers are often forced to act as first responders, mental health monitors, medical gatekeepers. Without adequate support, errors become inevitable. Policy versus practice. Prisons are governed by policies that look comprehensive on paper. Policies may require regular wellness checks, suicide watch protocols, medical referrals, use of force reporting. In practice, these policies collide with reality. If a housing unit is understaffed, checks may be rushed. If medical units are overwhelmed, referrals may be delayed. If paperwork burdens are high, warning signs may go undocumented. Policy compliance becomes selective, not by intention, but by necessity. The gap between policy and practice is where deaths occur. Failure to act on known risks. Many inmate deaths are preceded by warnings. These warnings may include threat reports from inmates, prior assaults, mental health evaluations, medical complaints, behavioral changes. Information often exists in fragments across departments. Security knows one piece. Medical knows another. Mental health knows a third. When systems fail to communicate, no one sees the full picture. Deaths are later described as unexpected, even when the risk was documented. The culture of silence. Prison culture discourages disclosure, on all sides. Inmates hesitate to report threats for fear of retaliation or being labeled informants. Officers may hesitate to escalate concerns to avoid administrative scrutiny or added workload. This culture does not require malice. It emerges from high stress, low trust, fear of consequences. Silence becomes a survival strategy. For inmates, it may mean death. For staff, it may mean avoiding blame. Use of force and medical aftermath. Use of force incidents are high-risk moments. Physical restraint, chemical agents, and control techniques can trigger medical emergencies, particularly in inmates with underlying conditions. After force is used, medical evaluation is required. Monitoring should follow. Symptoms may appear later. In some cases, post-force monitoring is insufficient. Medical distress is misinterpreted as non-compliance. Delayed response turns crisis into fatality. These deaths are often framed as unavoidable. Investigations frequently focus on whether policy was followed, not whether the policy was adequate. Lockdowns and compounding risk. Lockdowns are used to restore control after incidents or due to staffing shortages. During lockdowns, movement stops, medical access slows, mental health services are reduced, tension increases. Extended lockdowns create dangerous conditions, particularly for vulnerable inmates. Deaths during lockdowns are often linked to delayed care or unmanaged crises. Security measures meant to protect can unintentionally increase risk. Administrative accountability. When inmate deaths occur, investigations follow. Internal reviews focus on policy adherence. Documentation. Staff conduct external oversight. Varies by state. In many cases, findings are not made public. Disciplinary action is rare unless misconduct is clear and extreme. The system tends to protect itself. Accountability becomes procedural rather than corrective. The burden on individual officers. Correctional officers operate inside this system. Many experience moral injury, knowing what should happen, but being unable to make it happen. Officers report chronic stress, burnout, emotional detachment. Turnover increases. Experience drains away. New staff enter underprepared. This cycle increases risk further. Inmate deaths are not caused by a single bad actor. They emerge from environments that strain everyone inside them. When death becomes normalized in facilities with high mortality, death becomes routine. Medical emergencies are common. Suicide attempts are frequent. Violence is expected. Normalization dulls urgency. Staff respond as trained, but emotional impact fades. This does not mean staff are indifferent. It means survival, psychological and professional, requires distance. Normalization is a warning sign of systemic failure. Preventable death, accountability, and what the system refuses to fix. By the time an inmate dies in custody, the system usually treats the event as an ending. Reports are written. Causes are classified. Files are closed. The institution moves forward. What rarely happens is a full reckoning with the fact that many inmate deaths were preventable, not in theory, but in practice. Prison death is often framed as an unavoidable consequence of incarceration. That framing protects the system from deeper scrutiny. But when patterns repeat across facilities, across states, and across decades, the issue is not inevitability. It is refusal to change. Preventable does not mean predictable. Not every inmate death can be predicted in advance. But many occur under conditions that are well understood. Research, oversight reports, and court findings have repeatedly identified risk factors that increase inmate mortality: overcrowding, chronic understaffing, inadequate medical care, prolonged isolation, poor mental health screening, delayed emergency response. These factors are not secrets. They are documented realities. Yet they persist. Preventable deaths are not random. They cluster where risk is tolerated as normal. Classification without consequence: when an inmate dies, the cause is usually categorized as natural causes, suicide, homicide, accident. These categories simplify complex events. A death labeled natural causes may involve delayed treatment. A suicide may follow ignored warnings. A homicide may involve known threats that went unaddressed. The classification answers what happened, but rarely why it was allowed to happen. Once the category is assigned, urgency fades. Investigations that look inward: most inmate death investigations are conducted internally or by closely affiliated agencies. These investigations focus on policy compliance, documentation, individual actions. They rarely ask, was staffing sufficient? Were policies realistic? Were warning signs structurally ignored? When investigations prioritize liability protection over systemic correction, the outcome is predictable: minimal change. The system investigates itself, and absolves itself. Legal accountability is rare. Civil lawsuits sometimes follow inmate deaths. Families sue for wrongful death or civil rights violations. These cases face high barriers: qualified immunity protections, difficulty accessing internal records, deference to correctional judgment. Settlements may occur without admission of wrongdoing. Policy changes, if any, are limited and localized. Criminal charges against staff are exceedingly rare unless misconduct is extreme and undeniable. Accountability exists on paper. In practice, it is limited. The cost of inaction: failure to address systemic causes of inmate death has consequences beyond the prison walls. Costs include financial settlements paid by taxpayers, increased staff burnout and turnover, public distrust in correctional institutions, higher long-term incarceration costs. Most importantly, it costs lives. When prisons normalize preventable death, they send a message about whose lives matter, and whose do not. Mental health remains the weakest link. Despite growing awareness, mental health care remains one of the most under-resourced aspects of incarceration. Problems persist: shortage of qualified clinicians, overuse of solitary confinement, punitive responses to psychiatric symptoms, inadequate suicide prevention. Many inmates who die by suicide had documented mental illness and prior attempts. Monitoring protocols existed. Resources did not. Mental illness is treated as a management problem rather than a health condition. The result is predictable loss. Medical care, access without adequacy. Prisons often meet minimum legal standards for medical care. That does not mean care is sufficient. Issues include delayed diagnostics, limited specialist access, cost-driven treatment decisions. Poor continuity of care. Meeting minimum standards does not prevent death, it limits liability. The system is designed to survive lawsuits, not maximize health outcomes. Overcrowding is a policy choice. Overcrowding is not accidental. It is the result of sentencing laws, parole policies, and political decisions. Prisons become overcrowded because sentences are long, release mechanisms are limited, alternatives to incarceration are underused. Overcrowding increases every risk discussed in this series. Yet reducing it often faces political resistance. Death becomes collateral damage of policy. Why change is slow. Meaningful reform threatens entrenched systems. Reducing deaths would require increased staffing, expanded medical and mental health budgets, independent oversight, transparency. These changes cost money and challenge institutional culture. As long as inmate deaths remain largely invisible to the public, urgency remains low. Silence enables stagnation. The human reality behind the statistics: every inmate death represents a person who was fully under state control. They could not seek independent medical care. They could not leave a dangerous environment. They relied entirely on the institution for survival. When that institution fails, responsibility cannot be shifted elsewhere. Incarceration transfers duty of care to the state. Death under custody is not neutral, it is consequential. What the system refuses to admit, the most difficult truth, is this: many inmate deaths are not tragedies in the eyes of the system. They are acceptable losses. They do not disrupt operations. They do not threaten legitimacy. They do not demand reform. As long as death remains administratively manageable, change remains optional.